How many times can one franchise get kicked while it's down before the universe finally decides enough is enough? That's the question haunting every single Maple Leafs fan right now. And honestly, it's becoming harder to answer with each passing week. Welcome back to Boys and Blue News, where we don't just report on Toronto hockey. We dissect it, we analyze it, and we tell you exactly what it means for the future of this storied franchise. If you're not already subscribed, hit that button now, because what we're about to break down today will reshape how you understand the Leafs' immediate future. The 2025-26 season is creeping closer by the day, and with fewer than 30 games remaining in the preseason window, Toronto finds itself staring down a nightmare scenario that feels painfully familiar. Another goaltending crisis. Not a minor hiccup, not a temporary setback, a full-blown, roster-destabilizing emergency in the crease that threatens to derail everything this organization has built. This isn't just another injury report. This is a referendum on whether the Maple Leafs can ever escape the cyclical curse that has defined their goaltending department for far too long. Let's set the stage clearly, because the timeline here matters. Anthony Stolarz was supposed to be the answer. After years of searching, the Leafs finally had a goaltender who looked capable of carrying the load through the regular season and beyond. But then the injury bug struck, and suddenly Joseph Woll was thrust into the spotlight as the primary starter. For approximately 48 hours, it felt like maybe, just maybe, Toronto had found a lifeline. Woll showed promise. He demonstrated composure under pressure. The fan base allowed themselves a rare moment of cautious optimism. And then, as if scripted by some cruel comedy writer, Woll suffered his own injury shortly after taking the reins. Now, with both Stolarz and Woll sidelined simultaneously, the Maple Leafs are forced to turn to Dennis Hildy and Art Turk, two young goalies still fighting to prove they belong in the NHL, let alone in a starting role for a contending franchise. This is where the panic sets in, and frankly, it's justified. The Leafs have spent years, literal years, searching for one thing: stability in net, consistency, predictability, a quiet, reliable presence between the pipes that allows the rest of the roster to focus on their jobs without constant anxiety about what might happen if the goaltender has an off night. Instead, what they've gotten is a revolving door of injuries, inconsistency, and the perpetual sensation of standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the next catastrophe. But here's where today's story takes a dramatic turn. Over the past 24 hours, one trade simulation has absolutely dominated social media, fan forums, and every corner of Leafs Nation. It's the kind of proposal that initially sounds like a lifeline, the type of deal that makes you sit up in your chair and think, wait, could this actually work? The proposal: Joseph Woll to the St. Louis Blues in exchange for Jordan Binnington. On the surface, it's seductive. Binnington is a Stanley Cup champion. He's a proven winner at the highest level. He's being mentioned in serious conversations as a potential starter for Team Canada at the upcoming Olympics. For a franchise desperate for answers, adding a goaltender with that pedigree feels like it could be the missing piece. But here's the problem, and it's a massive one. The numbers don't work. Not even close. Binnington's salary cap hit is nearly double what Woll earns annually. Taking on that contract would immediately push Toronto's cap situation into unsustainable territory. We're talking about a scenario where the Leafs would be forced to surrender important depth pieces, valuable assets that the roster simply cannot afford to lose, just to make the math remotely feasible. And even if St. Louis agreed to retain a portion of Binnington's salary, Toronto doesn't have the spare pieces to construct a competitive package that would actually interest the Blues. Names like Nick Robertson and Kaylee Jarn-Krok were floated in online discussions as potential sweeteners to make the deal work. But let's be real here. If St. Louis was genuinely open to moving their starting goaltender, the asking price would be substantially higher than a mid-tier prospect and a bottom-six forward. The gap between what fans think this trade should cost and what it would actually cost is enormous. And here's the kicker. Even if the Leafs managed to pull off this deal, they'd be sacrificing roster depth and cap flexibility to solve one problem while simultaneously creating three others. That's not a solution. That's trading one crisis for multiple crises. This is where Brad Treliving's front office needs to show discipline and restraint. Because despite all the noise, despite the viral trade simulations, despite the emotional pull of adding a big name, the most logical path forward is actually far more modest. The Leafs should be targeting goalies like Laurent Brossoit or Alex Nedeljkovic. These are names that have already been mentioned in serious internal discussions, and they fit the profile perfectly: inexpensive, accessible, and capable of holding down the fort until Stalers or Wallace return to full health and reclaim the starting role. This isn't sexy. It's not the kind of move that generates headlines or gets fans excited on social media, but it's smart, it's sustainable, and most importantly, it addresses the immediate crisis without creating new ones. Brossoit, in particular, brings veteran experience and a track record of performing in high-pressure situations. Nedeljkovic offers a younger option with upside. Neither would require the Leafs to gut their roster or compromise their cap structure. Neither would force Toronto into a corner where they're scrambling to find cap space by trading away pieces they desperately need. The reality is this: the Leafs don't need a franchise-altering goaltender right now. They need a competent placeholder. Someone who can step in, do the job adequately, and give the organization breathing room while their primary options recover. That's it. That's the assignment. But this situation reveals something deeper about the Maple Leafs' organizational challenges. For a franchise with this much talent up front, with Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and a supporting cast that should be competitive night in and night out, the fact that goaltending continues to be a recurring nightmare is genuinely baffling. It speaks to either bad luck, poor roster construction, or a combination of both. And at some point, bad luck stops being an excuse. At some point, you have to acknowledge that there's a systemic issue that needs to be addressed at a fundamental level. The Leafs have invested significant resources into finding goaltending solutions. They've drafted, they've traded, they've signed free agents. And yet, here they are again, scrambling for answers with the season approaching. This is the conversation that needs to happen in the front office, not just about who to acquire this week, but about how to build a sustainable goaltending pipeline that doesn't leave the organization perpetually vulnerable to injury or inconsistency. So here's what we know: the Binnington trade, as appealing as it might sound in theory, is a trap. It's a panic move dressed up as a solution. The smarter play, the only play that makes sense, is for Treliving to pursue modest, realistic options that address the immediate need without compromising the future. The Leafs need stability. They need competence. They need a goaltender who can hold the line until the cavalry returns. That's not Binnington. That's Brossoit or Nedeljkovic or someone in that tier. And if the front office understands that, then maybe, just maybe, Toronto can finally break this curse. Now, I want to hear from you, Leafs Nation. Do you think an aggressive move like the Binnington trade makes sense, or should the team stick with a more conservative approach? Between Brossoit and Nedeljkovic, who do you think is the better fit for Toronto? And more broadly, how much longer can this franchise tolerate goaltending being a constant source of anxiety? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your perspective matters. If this breakdown resonated with you, smash that like button. It genuinely helps the channel reach more Leafs fans who need this analysis. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a critical update on what's happening with your Maple Leafs. Thanks for being here. Stay locked in. And as always,